When I got started at my first job, I literally would go up and I'd be like, today's the day I'm getting fired. I'm totally getting fired. And in this video, I want to talk about reality versus expectations, because there's some misconceptions that we may believe when learning to code that might hinder us in having realistic expectations and causing us to quit before we even give it a good chance. Like I was saying at the beginning of the stream, I was talking to Logix, and yesterday he was helping me with something in JavaScript, helping me do more logic-based games to help me think through problems and figure out how you would go about solving something. And we definitely ran into bugs while pair coding, and we definitely had situations where, you know, we get to a point you're like, wow, this is actually going to take a lot of thought, a lot of work to work through and figure it out. And it might take hours, might take hour and a half, whatever it is. But the point is, it's not like you watch these tutorials where people just go through the steps and all of a sudden magically everything worked. You have to understand, with a lot of these tutorials that you watch online, people prepared, they tested the app, they worked through it backwards and forwards. So if anything, they're not going to have mistakes. And when you're learning, you want to make sure they present you with an easy to follow tutorial which does not have bugs. Because what happens if you do have a bug and you encounter it as a beginner learning to code, you won't know where to look to fix it, and you're going to not be able to finish the tutorial. I remember when I first started out learning React, I remember I would run into an issue like halfway through the lesson, maybe like, 6 hours into it, closer to the end, and I'll be like, what is this bug? I can't figure it out. I don't know enough about programming. I can't solve it. And I would literally scrap the project, go to the first video, and try to do it again from beginning because I did not know enough. So a lot of times when we're learning to code, it's okay for us to watch these perfectly presented tutorials, but at the same time, it's going to make us think or feel that that's how work is. When you're at a job, you're going to think that you just have to write perfect code and it just has to work all the time. And that is not the case. And when you're learning and you run into mistakes, you might start to think like, maybe I'm not cut out for this, maybe I'm not meant to this, not realizing that struggling with your code and running into issues is part of programming. And that's why you hear people say cliche things like this: being a programmer is not about coding, it's about solving problems. You know what I mean? And that's true. It's your job to solve a particular problem, and sometimes you might have a problem that you haven't seen a solution for, and you have to spend time doing research, looking things up, and that's just the way it is. When I got started at my first job, I literally would go up and I'd be like, today's the day I'm getting fired. I'm totally getting fired, because my first week, definitely my first 2 weeks, I just want to be honest with you, I would sit in front of my computer, look at the code, because the company I started with, there is no like introductory period. They just throw you into the code base, into the deep end. And I'm looking at the code and nothing makes sense to me. And I'm like, well, I could do these projects at home. It's not a problem. But at work, I literally spent hours just staring at the line of code, trying to make sense, trying to go through the code and not knowing what anything was. And the point is, that's normal. You have to learn the code base, and the things you don't know, you ask questions, and you spend a lot of time Googling, trying to fill in the knowledge that you're missing. And that's just part of what it is. And every day I'd come into work and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. I don't know what I'm doing. As I got comfortable, I got better. But still to this day, there's times where you're going to find something that just gets you stuck and you just have to work through it. So the only reason I say this to you guys is because idea here is that if you want to become a programmer, you have to understand that nothing is perfect, and 80% of the time you're just going to struggle. So I always say, embrace the suck, embrace the struggle. You need to make it part of you to just be okay with it. And that's what coders do. They struggle through things, and then eventually they figure out the solution and they get it done. And that's the exciting part of coding. And I was talking to Logix Indy yesterday, and we talked a lot about code. And what we didn't talk about is like, oh, how much money can you make, or how much money are you making? Because the point is, people that do programming, yes, money could be good eventually, but they do it because they love it. We actually just talked about code and nothing else. I guess you have to be kind of nerdy like that if you want to call it, but the point is, I love code, he loves code. So when we do our work, when we study programming, we study because we love it, and because we love it, we don't mind when we hit a setback, we don't mind when we get stuck. So that's important to keep in mind, that that's kind of the process of going things.